Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Sam Holloway. I'm a professor at the University of Portland, and I'm also a small business owner a few times over. And I spend most of my time in my academic research studying the global craft beer industry. I've also spent some time researching how to make decisions under extreme uncertainty, the kind of uncertainty where we don't say it's unknown, we say it's unknowable. And I think that's pretty accurate for given what we're dealing here with the current coronavirus crisis and trying to make the best decisions for our employees and our families and ourselves and our health and safety. What I'd like to do is just give a brief presentation, if we can get the technology working, over what the academic research says on how to make decisions when there's no possible way to know what the future looks like. There's actually a methodology. And generally what I find is for small business owners, they usually listen to this talk and they say, Sam, that's how I always think. What's revolutionary about that? And it's actually contrary to what we teach mostly in business schools, which is more the Shark Tank version of the world. And quite honestly, the Shark Tank version of the world doesn't work during a global pandemic. There are no expected returns on investment you can make right now. And so how do you try to make rational and good decisions in a time like this? I'll share a few things with you. I've also sent Deanna and the chamber a free resource on my website that people can look at that'll recap some of the things we did with a beer specific example. Let me see here.
Are you seeing it?
Yeah,
you got it?
Coming through. I got it. So good. So anyway, I'm a college professor and I have two daughters that are 12 and 9. So I'm really used to getting interrupted. I like getting interrupted. So if somebody has a question, just please turn on your mic and ask it. It won't bother me. This presentation is only 6 PowerPoint slides. And I think one of them is this slide and the other one's a thank you slide. So it's really only 4 slides. I'll do a brief talk and then folks, we just open it up for questions. So yeah, Deanna, if you could go to the second slide.
Thank you. I'm doing it sort of, I haven't downloaded it completely, so I'm just going to scroll. How's that?
It'll work. And can folks I've got the participant view on my screen here. Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me and you can see okay, good. All right, good. Thank you very much. So basically, serial entrepreneurs or expert entrepreneurs, people that have founded multiple businesses, they generally don't like to play by the normal rules. A fundamental characteristic of a serial entrepreneur is that they hate market research. They don't, even though that's what we teach in most business degree programs, that the past is a good predictor of the future, which is the fundamental assumption of market research, that if we just study what's happened in the past, it's really going to give us an idea for where to go in the future. And, that's true if you're the industry leader, if you own, greater than 25% of the market and you have existing customers that repeatedly buy from you. And that's also what's easy to teach in business schools. Those of you that maybe had business degrees, you're used to this stuff because some academics don't have any work experience and they end up just going by what the textbooks say. And that's okay, because there is valuable learning in that, but that's not how I teach and it's not my experience. I didn't decide to become an academic until I became an entrepreneur. I became an academic in my 30s. And as Brad Smith can tell you, I'm about 100 years old now. So it's been a while. So what do entrepreneurs do? Serial entrepreneurs, they love to play in this space of, instead of researching the market and trying to predict the future based on the past, they would much rather create a space where they can be competitive and they can be successful. So this idea, if you want to do a keyword search on a lot of this stuff, the idea of market creation instead of market discovery through research is really what I'm talking about. And I think it's applicable in our current situation because there is no past other than the 1917 Spanish flu that we could research to figure out what's happening currently from a health perspective or an economic perspective. And so I do think that these making decisions under extreme uncertainty criteria that normally is about creating a new market for your product, I think it does apply here in this global pandemic. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So this is a little bit of foreshadowing. Clay Christensen, a famous professor from Harvard who unfortunately passed away a few months ago from complications with cancer. He has really influenced the way that I think and the way that a lot of people think. If you've read his books like The Innovator's Dilemma, it really is he really was a visionary thinker. And he just had this basic statement here on number 3 on my list here: markets that don't exist can't be analyzed. Peter Lynch, a famous entrepreneur and investor, said, you can't see the future if you're always looking in the rearview mirror. And that's generally what market research does, is look in the rearview mirror. And again, when next year and the next 5 years looks a lot like the previous 5 years, market research is the way to go, right? If you're in a position to use that to make incrementally more valuable products for your existing customers, that's a way better, less risky, higher ROI way to go. I just don't think it applies in the current climate where there is no past that can predict the future. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So again, I'm a beer industry nerd. I've been a shareholder and a board member of Oakshire Brewing in Eugene, Oregon for about 10 years, and just fell in love with all of the small business owners, not just the brewers, but the folks that run food carts that serve food at the brewers, or at least they used to until the current situation. You know, the people that run the distribution companies, the lawyers that study the beer industry, the CPAs that look at beer companies and help people set up their books. And really, you know, if you think of your business not as the outcome of some business plan that you built through market research, but really as a series of business model choices, that's when you get to the point where you can look at the current COVID-19 situation and think about your business as, what pieces can I break off and still be successful in, given the fact that I can't open my tap room for health reasons, et cetera. So if you go to the next slide. So this is really the last slide of the show, and I apologize for the small print, but on the left here you have what we teach in business schools, what we see on Shark Tank, and what venture capital firms and private equity firms and sort of the traditional way of thinking exists. That's the business planning paradigm, if you use my words. What I want to talk about today, just briefly, is if you have a business model perspective that's based on what you can control, not what you can predict, you're going to be more successful during a crisis like this. Instead of market research like you would do in the old paradigm, think of a short-term experiment that you can do. Think of so instead of doing a 5-year discounted cash flow pro forma in Excel of what you think this opportunity should be, go to a trade show. Can't do that right now, of course, bad example, but think about a new customer you could find that might buy your product. And if they won't buy your product, instead of turning bad news into, the old thinking is if somebody doesn't like your product, you're just talking to the wrong person. Well, serial entrepreneurs and expert entrepreneurs, what they say is, why don't you like my product? What would I have to change about it to get you to be interested? And even if you don't want to buy it, do you know somebody else out there who might? What would it take for me? What change would I have to make for you to introduce me to that buyer from Nordstrom or that person that might be interested in something? And so it's really a methodology to take surprises, and instead of taking a surprise meaning as I'm talking to the wrong person, take it as I need to pivot and I need to change my business model. So instead of a full-scale 5-year marketing plan, we talk about short-term, or the term we used was hypercycle plans. And Deanna has a link to a Harvard Business Review article that I wrote about hypercycle plans that's free, that she can send you. It's actually a link on my page that you can click on from one of my crafting strategy pages. There's a research out of UCLA from the early 1980s by a guy named Marvin Lieberman about first to market. The truth of the matter is, if you look at the empirics, the people that go first to market generally don't make any money. They spend all their money building the market and training consumers on the new value. And it's usually the second or third movers that come in and reap the profits. And Apple's the easiest example here. They do it time and again. They didn't have the first MP3 player. They had the second one in with a cooler design and a built-in connection to the iTunes store. So they let other people build their markets, and then they come in and gain that mind share. The old school is to be secretive, be perfect, hide in your office doing market research, write the perfect business plan, only enter the market after you've secured your angel investing or you've been on Shark Tank. That's not what expert entrepreneurs do. I don't think that's what you should do during a pandemic. You should fail fast, fail cheap, talk to everyone, launch the business with your minimum viable product, get the feedback, learn, try again. Our research indicates that this approach, you generally get to the same place you would by trying to be perfect at much lower cost and in much faster time. And instead of basing your suspicions and your ideas and your hopes on something you read on your computer, you actually get it from talking to real people and potential customers. This whole methodology is driven by this idea of affordable loss. So instead of designing your business around what return on investment do you think I can make, you say, what am I willing to lose? And that's what most small business owners and expert entrepreneurs do when they get started and when they make big decisions, is they say, it's worth quitting my job and losing income for a year to chase this dream. I'm willing to give up a year of income, a year out of the job market, maybe the 25 grand I have in savings, and call my friends and ask them if they'll introduce me to potential customers. I'm willing to give up potentially those relationships and that cash and this time to give it a try. And I think the thinking would be, during a pandemic like this, it doesn't make sense to make big bets right now. Things are changing hourly. The rules for all of us, especially if you're in hospitality and beer, they've never been this difficult before. So making a huge bet now and trying something new isn't the right time, even if you think you could dominate a future market. The better thing to do is to have an affordable loss mentality. Think fast, think small, lose small, pivot, and ultimately you'll get to a point, I think, where you can have a scalable and repeatable business model. Deanna, that's what I've got. I'd love to open it up to questions now about this presentation or anything else that I can do to help you. I was born and raised in Hillsborough, so these are my roots. What can I do to help?
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, I think that really sets the stage for thinking outside of the panic, which we've all kind of been doing, is thinking, in the panic moment. So I'm interested in what our participants have questions for you, and, maybe posing some of their business challenges and having you give them some advice on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do my best.
I have a question. Sam, Brad, what do you see your clients doing, especially brew pubs that have no restaurant viability now, that are not necessarily bottling or canning? Are they just filling growlers and hoping to make through, or what are they doing, or what have you seen, anything unique that people are doing to survive?
Yeah, good question. Basically, if a lot of breweries in Oregon in particular, they were built on a wholesale model, let's say 10 years ago, and they were built to put beer into kegs and put beer into bottles and cans and get them out to market. And up until COVID-19, that was actually a bad strategy, because the margins are all in direct to consumer sales and taproom sales. And so a lot of folks were actually winding down their wholesale business until this struck. And so they're sitting on some underutilized assets at the time. Instead of, they had an older canning line or maybe an older bottling line, but they had transitioned away from it. Now those are the most valuable assets that you have, because with the restaurant and taproom closings and bar closings all over the country, there are no more keg sales just about anymore. There's almost no beer getting delivered to restaurants and bars. And so people are actually buying more beer this month than they did last year as they stockpile beer, but they're buying it in cans. So the new terror is, what are we going to do if we run out of cans? We're already running short on growlers, because a lot of brewers, I think correctly, will not refill somebody's growler they bring from home that hasn't been sanitized. That's not the healthy way to go. And so they're raiding homebrew shops and other places to find sanitized growlers to try to meet demand. So what am I seeing most brewers do? Get your can inventory squared away, so that when you actually have orders or a beer delivery service, you can get the cans before they maybe run out. Because again, the huge brewers, the Anheuser-Busch InBevs, the Heinekens of the world, they have a lot more leverage over the aluminum can manufacturers than a little brewery in Forest Grove or Portland or Hillsborough has. And so you've got to use some of your cash to up your inventory so you can fill the packages, and you have to pivot into home delivery, to-go beer sales, touchless beer sales, and we're actually seeing a lot of success with that in the Hillsborough region and in the greater Portland area. But it's not success like we're used to. It's just survival at this point.
All right.
What do you think? What do you think the survival rate's going to be?
Well, there was a recent survey from the American Brewers Association that came out about 6 days ago that said about 70% of all breweries will go out of business within 6 weeks if there's no support from the feds. And we're also seeing a big bottleneck in the federal loans. A lot of large banks are not even participating anymore. I hope none of you bank with some of the banks that have turned off their applications already. That's not the goal of that plan. There's been a lot more action by the smaller and local banks in terms of accepting and funding the PPP loans that are just starting to fund now. So yeah, it's a really scary time. I think the estimates are at least 20 to 30% closures if the economy isn't opened, or if they're unable to secure some low interest debt to try to stave off elimination.
Sam, one of the things I'm hearing from small business is that they've gone into business and they've been able to remain debt free,
Yeah.
and so now all of a sudden it's I don't want to go into debt. I'm looking for grants, free money. But wouldn't you say that the PPP, which I think is like a 1%, is almost free money?
Yeah, I mean, desperate times call for desperate measures. I think all of those rules of thumb of debt-free, cash is king. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs right now, and that's almost condescending or rude if you try to sell somebody on the old mantra that was sort of put in place when things were going fine, or when it was, right now, survival has less and less to do with the unique value proposition that your business offers, and more to do with your ability to scramble, right? And so swallow your pride, scramble, take a 1%, interest loan if you can. Take a private loan from your rich Aunt Sally or somebody like that to try to stave off things. It's a lot of entrepreneurs out there. They did the right thing for their employees by laying people off early. And that's a heart-wrenching decision. Nobody wants to do that. But at the same time, if they're going to have a better chance at making a livelihood by getting first in line for unemployment insurance, that's the right thing to do, as painful as it is. And so I think all the rules need to be rewritten now. Otherwise, you just throw up your hands and call it good. And I don't think any of us want to do that.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm a winery, not a brewery, but I think the question applies to both.
Sure.
What is your recommendation or vision for when we're allowed to open up again? Do we ramp back up as fast as we were before all this happened? Or do we take on a new strategy and kind of ease into it?
Well, Juanita, I enjoy drinking wine too, so I'm really glad you're on the call. In fact, my favorite style are sort of the Southern Rhone Valley reds, kind of the big, bold reds. But anyway, I think entrepreneurs need to use this hardship that we're in right now also as a learning opportunity. I think rushing right back to the way things were operating in December or January would be a mistake, because we don't have any guarantee that even if the economy reopens, consumers and customers are going to behave and feel safe behaving the same way that they did before. And so I think, again, this is not the time for huge bets and a huge rushing back to the way things were. I think it's a time for being shrewd and prudent and making small bets, because we might learn something, like beer to go sales, or, wine to go sales, which is a sort of a bread and butter for a lot of small wineries out there that can't get onto grocery store shelves. Ramping up your wine club, extending the ability for people to get beer to go, maybe partnering with a food provider or a food truck. If you haven't done that before, when things start to reopen, that might allow people to eat something and stay longer and buy that extra glass or that extra bottle of wine during their visit. I think some of the little experiments you can make now, keep that in mind when you reopen. And, I don't think life's going to get back to normal, according to a lot of people smarter than me, until 2021. So the key is, how do I survive the rest of 2020 and put my winery or my small business in the best position? And I think that is to be careful and thoughtful and not rush back to the way things were.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have a question in the chat that's asking about industry consolidation or asset sales.
All right. Let me see if I can pull up the chat here. Sam, are you seeing any? Yes, I think Tom Engel, thanks for the question, Tom. Sorry, I'm moving this over here. Okay. So I actually, if you go on the Facebook, on the Crafting a Strategy Facebook page, a friend of mine who's a wine industry M&A expert just did an interview. His name's Kevin O'Brien. He's with Zapponi and Company down in Santa Rosa, California. But he just did a talk about how the first quarter of M&A in all of beverage alcohol, not just wine or not just beer or spirits, was off to a record start. And now everything's really dried up as people are worried about valuations. And I think Tom, to generalize, if you're looking to value a company right now, like literally this day for a sale in the near future, the discounts that you're going to have to give to protect against the risk of a future economy that isn't fully opened up, I think it's a bad idea. I think consolidation in M&A is going to happen with very large companies that need to do it to stay alive and drive down their average cost of goods sold. But I think for most small businesses or growing businesses that are looking for an exit, I don't think right now is a good time to get a good value for your company. So I would try to hang on as long as you can until we get to a little bit closer to normal. As far as asset sales, yeah, we're seeing the secondary market pick up again in the beer industry for people that, most banks and landlords are being pretty forgiving right now in giving 1 to 2 months relief. But I'm not sure how much longer that's going to go. And so yeah, I think we're going to see that pick up. And at least in the world of beer where I work, when we started Oakshire Brewing back in 2006, I think there were 1,000, maybe 1,200 breweries in the country. And now there's 8,145, at least yesterday there were. And so, yeah, we do have a lot of new entrants, and we do have a lot of assets in small business right now. And not everybody's going to make it, unfortunately. Thanks for your question.
All right, folks, other questions for Sam? Contemplations, just, throw up a challenge, see what he has to say.
So do you think with like the growler problem and the canning problem, you see this will lead to any kind of innovation of other ways to deliver the product? I mean, have you seen anything that may not have been economically viable before? To date myself, it makes me think of Boda bags in college. But is there any other way? If there's somebody that's trying to figure out how to bottle, that's small and can't afford to put in a canning line, are there independent canners that are actually doing that? I mean, I know there used to be, but
yeah, Brad, good question. Desperation is the mother of all invention, I think. But specific to beer, I don't see sort of the boxed wine innovation or beer in a bag innovation really taking off necessarily. What I do think you'll see hopefully is some wholesalers and some other folks with larger cash flows step up and buy cans for their suppliers, for their breweries, and hold on to them so that the breweries can not have to order a whole truckload for $18,000. They can actually have their supply chain partners do that for them and then buy them at a small markup in $5,000 chunks. You're seeing a lot more of that in the beer industry right now. But there are ideas out there that I'll never think of, and that a lot of current brewers never think of, because they're so busy working in their business, trying to stay alive, that they don't have time to work on their business. And that's really where new entrepreneurial opportunities can come through. If somebody does have a great new packaging innovation or repurposing of maybe an innovation from a different industry to allow beer to be packaged and shipped safely and keep the beer fresh, now's the time. But I haven't heard of anything like that. I do see on the, go ahead, Brad.
One other question on that. I see that now, there's a couple of cider places that'll deliver to your house. Is that legal? Because I remember in college, that was always the big thing. How can we get a beer delivery service or a liquor store to deliver? And that was always like, you can't do it. The OLCC won't allow it. So what are the rules regarding that now?
I have to give the OLCC a lot of credit. Early on in this COVID epidemic, like mid-February or so, they let it be known that through a simple form, you could turn your brewery public house license into a home delivery service. And they were returning your filled out form within hours. So the the breweries that were on it early, and then similar programs started coming out in Washington. It's allowed in Washington now too. But yeah, the entrepreneurs that were on top of it and got out in front of it, they quickly, within hours, got their license to be a home delivery service. And so that is new, definitely since you and I were in college, but it's really new just since COVID-19. And I think, you got to give the OLCC some credit. They, instead of getting in the way of commerce, they actually set up a system to keep commerce going. And I was pretty impressed with that. I see Tom has another question. What's the biggest mistake you've seen small business owners make between now and the start of the shutdown? Man, judging people during this time is really not my best move. There's so little that I know about anything other than beer business, and maybe a little bit of construction business from my prior career. I think if I stick to my party line, I think making big bets right now based on prior data is a mistake. I think you need to go be methodical, be slow. If you're lucky enough to get one of those PPP loans and you can bring back your employees, do so. But your employees, hopefully they're in it for the long haul too, because I know bringing them back is a big commitment on your end. And even though we think some of that loan is going to be forgivable, we hope it is. That's what it was designed to do. Who really knows in the implementation what's going to happen over the next 6 months? So I would say in terms of the biggest mistake, boy, I think it's misguided for me to say anything at this point.
Other questions for Sam? So I would just ask in terms of if you had the pen and you were the one writing the next CARES package, financial package, what would you think would be most beneficial for small businesses that maybe don't have, a large number of employees to bring back? But what would help small businesses that are like us, 1 to 5, or they might have multiple locations with different number of employees? Mm-hmm. I just think it's difficult that there's so many unique circumstances to try to figure out how to help the most number of small businesses with one type of package.
I think the real bottleneck right now are the banks. As hard as they're trying, usually the largest banks that have the biggest staff to help the SBA get this money out there, they're the ones that are closing up shop and not taking on any more applications. So I know Wells Fargo did that recently. Right. So that's really, really frustrating and disappointing. I think, I do think that whether it's part of the CARES Act or another act, I do believe we're going to have several rounds of stimulus packages for small businesses. The first one they did was a good try. Speaking, personally here from the beer industry, it's not perfect, right? So for example, if I have a bar that I own in Portland or in Hillsborough, let's say, and I had to let go of my bartender, when she applied for unemployment, her income included tips. And if I'm supposed to bring her back now to a minimum wage job with no tips, it might be better for her to stay on unemployment from a financial perspective than it would be to come back and work. And that's not how it's supposed to work, but unfortunately, those are the rules right now. And so I think, perhaps making industry specific aid available that takes into account a little bit more of the nuance and some of that would really go a long way as we introduce more stimulus packages, throughout the end of spring and summer to really try to help, situations like that. And I've talked to a couple employment lawyers. I'm saying, what's the best thing to do? I mean, I appreciate that in this situation of somebody that was working for tips, they didn't quite get it right. But at the same time, I don't want to have to potentially call an employee and say, hey, would you like your job back? And they're like, I'm making more on unemployment. No, that's an awkward situation. We need to try to get better.
Well, as I understand it, if you're a furloughed employee, which is like a 4-week time period, you don't have the option of not coming back unless you want to repay the unemployment that you received, because it changes the dynamic a lot. That is sort of the requirement, is that they come back. But you're right. I mean, I would like an employee to come back and be happy about it rather than begrudging about the fact that now they're making less than they are and working twice as hard.
Yeah, it's a tough situation, and I do believe that all business owners do want the best. The only way to get and keep great people is to treat them as best as you possibly can, and so hopefully we can keep getting better in the types of aid that is offered and help people in businesses that are on Main Street.
I got one more question. I don't know. I know you're crafting a strategy is kind of worldwide. What are you seeing, or have you had any chance to see what's happening in the countries that are ahead of us in this pandemic, and most notably ones that are starting to come out of this, if they're doing anything differently, or if you're seeing anything different, or if it's just, we have no idea, we're waiting to see?
Yeah, we have a, thanks for that sort of plug there, Brad. I'll buy you a beer when this is all over. We have breweries in 19 countries right now that are all going through the same thing. And the truth of the matter is, what country really is coming out of this? I mean, perhaps we could say China, just because they were sort of, unfortunately, the first to go. And even in Wuhan, things are opening up a little bit. I don't have any members in that region of China, but I will say too that it's difficult to sometimes trust the data. When I talk to the Chinese government about beer companies, they'll tell me that they have, less than 200 breweries, but then I can talk to the canning line manufacturer that has 2,000 orders that they just shipped, so it's always interesting to trust data from other places. What's really happening now is, at least in beer, is a lot of the rest of the world is looking to the Americans for innovations and ideas, because we do have a pretty good track record of, when our backs are up against the wall, we do come up with new innovations. And so I'm seeing beer to go sales, beer delivery service in Australia, a lot of members down there, in Europe as well as across the United States, as people are just doing everything they can to scramble right now until we understand what the new normal is going to look like.
Hey, you guys, don't be shy. Ask questions. So I know some of the folks that are on with us today, and
yeah.
So
you can be the teacher and you can call them by name.
I was just,
why don't you have a question?
Circumstances. We have maybe folks that might own coffee shops. We have folks that might own restaurants that, again, from a standpoint of, and I'll just use my coffee shop owner as an example of extremely innovative young entrepreneurs. I think I'm looking to them to nod, right? 5 stores. And
I think I see who you're talking about.
Yes. And I mean, just an amazing story. And so normally entrepreneurs in that situation would come up against these circumstances, and we would look to other folks that have been through something, right? The veteran entrepreneurs, and say, okay, what the hell do I do? And we're all in this soup together, and no one has any really good answers. But I want to, call out my friend Tyler and the work that they've done as, really very innovative entrepreneurs, but in a situation that, can really, there's a sense of panic, right? And you have all of these people that are depending upon you, and how do you do the right thing? And then how do you do the right thing when you open back up again? How do you position yourself to ensure that you're doing the right thing for your own family, but also your employees as well?
I think it worked. They're turning on their mics.
Simon. I don't know if you can hear me, but.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, it's been a tricky time because we were one of the companies that laid everyone off right out the gate, because that was what was recommended to us. And we're grateful that we did that. But it's a lot of guesswork. It's a lot of trying something and then figuring out if that works, and all the information about all the different SBA loans and the different government aid, and it changes every day and that sort of thing. And
almost every hour, yeah.
We've applied for every single thing we possibly could, and then it's just a lot of waiting. But even now too, as we're looking at maybe what it looks like to come back from this and how we're going to transition into that, it's going to look a lot different than than just even a month ago. So we're kind of brainstorming that right now. Like, what are the things that we can change as a business to be prepared for something like this again? Because people are saying, like, what if this is a COVID season? Like, every February this happens again. We have to figure out how to survive. And we're grateful. I mean, we shut down all of our stores except for one drive-through, because drive-through people are more comfortable with.
Yeah.
So that's been staying pretty busy, and we still roast our own coffee. And we're shipping that all around the country. And so we're grateful for those things. But at the same time, when we reopen, so it's not going to just, it's like a light switch. Everything's going to go back to normal. We have to figure out ways that we can service customers in ways that they feel comfortable, even after we all have the go ahead. I think there is still going to be social distancing, and I think there is going to still be hand sanitizing a lot more, and that sort of thing. So we're trying to set ourselves up for success in a new way, and brainstorm things. Like, for example, we always bucked the system of ordering online, because we feel like the kind of customer we want is the customer that enjoys the interaction, the individual interaction.
Right.
But now we're kind of throwing that out the window and saying, no, this might be the new way. And so we need to learn how people could order on an app and have a section in our store where they just walk in and grab it and walk out without ever even saying anything to us. And that seems offensive to us because we like the interaction with the customer. But at the same time, we need to be able to adapt. And we'll still do that interaction because most people do need that. But we still need to figure out ways that customers can still be comfortable in this new season. It's just weird.
Well, hey, thank you very much for sharing. You know, I've got one recommendation, but first, a quick story. You know, coffee and beer are so similar. I think we're always copying what you guys do, and you're always copying what we do. Very similar supply chains, very similar challenges and things. But I lost my train of thought here for a second. Oh, well, so my number one recommendation, and this is again just by talking to a lot of brewers out there. The most important relationship you probably have right now is with your banker. And the second most is probably with your landlord. And so how do you know, if the banks are the bottleneck and the banks have this money they need to deploy, but they're trying to figure out who they should give it to. Let's say they have 10 coffee shops and they've decided that they're going to, you know, give it out to 3. How do you position yourself to be one of those 3? I think constant communication with your bank. Hey, I've been reading the PPP loan regulations. I know exactly what is forgivable and I know exactly what is not. Here's my plan to make sure that this loan gets forgiven and off your books, because I know you're not making very much on this. You're only making 1% or something like that. So whatever you can do as the entrepreneur to say, I am the partner you want to work with long term. I'm trying to make your job easier. Please pick me. I think that's a good use of your time right now. The other thing I thought of while you were talking was, you know, you mentioned that not having that personal interaction sort of goes against the reason that you maybe got into the coffee business. And I super appreciate that. About last June, when we could still travel, I went to a conference in the Czech Republic, one of the homes of beer. And I found out that non-alcoholic beer, we call it low and no alcohol, so less than 3% all the way down to 0%, was like 42% of the German beer market. And I was just baffled by that. Found out it was 38% in Spain. And when I came back to Portland and I told brewers, they just looked at me, they just detested the words out of my mouth. I did not get into making craft beer to make beer without alcohol in it. What's wrong with you? You know, and now is the time. Desperate times call for desperate measures. We can sort of look at our long-held beliefs in the mirror and say, okay, that's not who I was, but who do I need to be now in order to keep this thing going? And so it sounds like you guys are in the right headspace to do that. And I would just say keep fighting. Oh, I see a question.
I got a question for you.
Hold on, Brad. I do see a question from a new person. Okay. And I go to Eleni. This is from the chat bar. She says, she says, I'm in the food business. I'm thinking to make lunch boxes and distribute to homes. Do you have any advice about distribution and how to market? Yeah, I mean, assuming all the food handling stuff is on the up and up and you're able to do that and you've got your cold storage lined up and delivery and refrigeration and all of those logistical things, I think one of the great ways to market for a small business is to think about the communities that you're already a member of. Could be the, neighborhood school association group on Facebook, could be, maybe somebody that you follow that you really like on Instagram, where you could reach out to them through a direct message and say, hey, would you be willing to potentially promote this to your followers? I'm a loyal follower of yours and I'm struggling, but I've got this new idea. Those are some kind of low cost asks that you can do to leverage the network effects of places that you're already a member of. I think that's a great way to go. I think spending, actual large sums of dollars on marketing right now is going to be really tough for most small businesses. So I would just try to leverage the social media and the free things. I had a conversation with a student group yesterday, one of my student groups at the University of Portland. They were saying, okay, how do we actually create this gain in awareness from our social media outings? And one of the things that I've seen, and I'm by no means a social media expert, far from it, but people like accomplishment. They like to go on missions. They like to go on badges. They like to earn things. So, maybe setting up a digital badge program of, your super fans. I've noticed on Facebook now, people that get ranked as a super fan of a particular page, they get a diamond next to their name. And even though that's almost costless, it sure makes you feel cool, right? And you might even share with your friends, look how I got this. So sending people on missions, sending your core brand community of customers on missions is a really good way to go. Brad says in the chat, the Ale Trail in Bend is an example of that. So, anything that you can do that allows people to feel closer to each other, even though we're forced to be distant, I think that could help your brand and your company. So I would try to think along those lines.
You there? My question,
okay.
I have a question from somebody else that didn't really want to ask.
Okay.
It's less talkative than me, which is not something I've ever been labeled as.
That's hard to believe.
Any recommendations on changing price models when things open to attack kind of the pent-up demand?
Boy, that's tough, right? In beer sales, sorry, Brad, that's my go-to example because I study it so much. But if you look at beer sales in Oregon the last 10 years, and maybe this is true in coffee too, I'll look for the reaction from the coffee guys here in my sidebar. Every time a brewery raises prices, sales go up. They're just, I remember when pints used to cost $4 and then they were $5. And now in Portland, you go to a place like Modern Times, it might be $8 for not even a full pint, and their sales increase because of the exclusivity. And so I'm not really a pricing expert. I do try to shy away from devaluing the quality of your product through a price gouge, even a temporary one, because I think most consumers in the Pacific Northwest and in Hillsborough, they will pay for quality as long as they can get it safely and as long as they can enjoy it. So the pricing thing is pretty frightening to me. Now, that being said, offering a different product line at a different price point could be a really good idea. We see this in the wine industry a lot. So if I use King Estate out of the Eugene area, their wines are premium Pinot Noirs. Maybe they sell for $30, $40. I believe their sub-brand is called North by Northwest. And it's a really excellent wine that's not branded the same as King Estate. And so maybe doesn't have some of that brand confusion, but man, does it sell at a price point that brings in a different customer segment, a different customer group. Coffee business. I have a few former students that used to work for a company called Coffee Bean International. That's now part of Farmer Brothers. I believe they were acquired. And, Farmer Brothers was actually much more suited to changing global environment than a company like Starbucks was. Starbucks, and for the coffee folks, I apologize in advance for using the wrong term, but Starbucks is a super premium brand. They maybe buy only 3% of quality of beans. And if they can't sell if it rains too much in Guatemala that year, instead of helping those farmers and buying what they can provide, they just don't buy. Whereas a company that was more, had a product portfolio that was much deeper and made everything from, Folgers quality all the way up through super premium, they were able to buy every year from farmers regardless of weather because they had that fully developed portfolio and they had those customer groups that they could sell to, private label at Kroger and things like that. So there are opportunities to expand your customer base, I think, through pricing. I just would be very thoughtful about it in terms of not degrading the the quality of the products that got you this place in the first point if you can.
I guess I would just like to remind us all that, you know, how many months ago was it that we were wringing our hands and fretting about no more single-use plastic bags and no more straws? And I'm like, wouldn't we sell our soul for that kind of problem again? Like, bring on the taking away of the straws. We can innovate. But I do think that I just find that there's such a resiliency in small business that, you know, that to your point, Sam, of scraping around, be a scrapper, don't, you know, have any of those I'm not going to go into debt types of mantras that keep you from getting back on your feet and being successful and doing what you want to do and what you're passionate about and what you've built. And so I'm just really hoping, because my business is around business, right? So if there is no you guys, there is no me. So it's really important that we rebuild, you know, Main Street America and make sure that we're not leaving behind our small businesses that are, you know, such a huge portion of our GDP and such a huge portion of our employment in the nation. And we just really, you know, I think the programs that the SBA's brought forward are great programs. I just think that we have now sort of illuminated the vulnerabilities of infrastructure that we've not invested in, whether that's the unemployment system or whether that's I mean, in Oregon, it's just embarrassing that we can't waive the week off because we have a COBOL system that we can't reprogram. And millions, I think the estimation was like something like $10 million that Oregonians are going to lose because they don't have access to those funds. So, you know, I do think that this is the lessons that we learn out of this will be generational and change the trajectory of our nation and certainly our state in terms of what we're able to accomplish.
Anybody else?
I just have one last question, but it's for Tyler, or a statement, and that I would like to volunteer to be the first one for hot coffee delivery when you guys start that up. Not beans. It's too hard for me to make my own and make it taste the same. So
I would suggest Elizabeth Case would be number 2 in that line for hot coffee delivery as well. You would have a fan club, but yeah.
Just for you guys.
All right. So we are at 2:57. We are scheduled to conclude at 3. So I will just open it up for any last questions, comments. Here's a great opportunity to talk to a doctor. How many times do you get to talk to a doctor, right?
So I actually have a question with my voice this time.
Awesome.
Oh, good.
I mean, it seems like this is a big distribution problem in a lot of ways, be it a service or a good. Do you anticipate that there are going to be, like, is Amazon going to get bigger? Walmart going to get bigger? You know, all the big players going to get bigger. Is anybody going to, do you see anybody maybe moving into the mid-tier to lower end of the whatever distribution is, be it product or physical product or service?
Yeah. Are you Tom? Is that, yeah, great question, Tom. Thank you. You know, I fundamentally believe that a highly fragmented industry is more inclusive. It allows more small businesses to grab a foothold and make a good living for themselves. I think consolidation kills most creativity and it kills most opportunity. So I would hate to see, you know, just only the big players get bigger and bigger. And, you know, that's really one of the reasons I made craftingastrategy.com was not everybody has the time or the interest or the ability to go get an MBA, but that doesn't mean that information shouldn't be available to them. And so we basically created Crafting a Strategy as we rewrote every lesson that we teach in the MBA to be about how do I compete in this arena if I'm little, if I'm small, and if I don't have the advantages of the big guys. And we sell it for almost nothing, $100 a year for all the information you can get by spending a lot more than that on an MBA. And so I think the Chamber of Commerce, I think groups like this that bring people together, that let the little guys have access to the information they need to make the right decisions, that's what we need to have more of. And I'm happy to help with that anytime.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And delighted to hear you're from Hillsborough. Appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We do have a small business solutions session scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, and it is Ask an Expert CFO. So if you're interested in certified, financial a certified financial officer and what information he can provide to you in terms of thinking about cash flow and again, debt ratios, those kinds of things, that's a place to be. Go ahead and register on the Chamber's website and have a great rest of your day.
I have one last question. If any of you know how to cut hair, I'm really in need. So if you could put a service online of teaching me how to fix this, I think you'll make $1 million. I'm
telling you, it's everywhere people are saying that. It's like, oh my gosh, my hair it's growing. It's all of the things that we take for granted, right? So there is some level of appreciation we get for those things that we just kind of took for granted.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.